I run this Rohit from Rise from Mastery. I'm excited to have Shruti Kapoor, who's a former co-founder and CEO of Wingman, which is now been acquired by Clari, which is an actionable conversation intelligence platform that unlocks insights from every sales interaction. Wingman was recently acquired by Clari, aiming to achieve the goal of revenue collaboration and governance. Welcome to the show, Shruti.
Thanks, Rohit. Great to be here. And that sounds like a mouthful in terms of the introduction. Happy to dive into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you have been part of the Y-combinator program, which is like a prestigious program. Why did you want to build Wingman, and what was the entire story all about?
Sure. So I think, there are always the real stories and then the stories we tell ourselves when we want to start companies.
Right.
For me, it was, before I started thinking about the idea or I had a timeline in mind that I wanted to start up, it was just like a real desire to get my hands dirty and build something from scratch. And I had been working at a fund for 8 years where we were investing in really early stage technologies and trying to actually take that as the fund itself to commercialization. And, some parts of that process were interesting. Some parts were definitely frustrating because we didn't have full control on I couldn't go and build that business. So, through that process, I was like, it's really exciting. It's really fascinating to see technology, but it's also frustrating not to have the control over it. So I wanted to build a tech startup on my own. But then I didn't have a specific idea that I was working on. And I joined another startup at that point. And there I was, helping them build out the sales team, figuring out their go-to-market motion. And through that process, I was like, oh, wow, I can't believe there's no better way of doing this when it comes to, sharing voice of customer with your product teams, understanding, why a particular rep is doing so well. So things like that, it kind of kept nudging at me hey, what if I could have all of these conversations recorded? Wouldn't I get a lot more value out of it? And that's kind of, the little seed that got planted. And, of course, many iterations, many customer interviews later, we had Wingman.
Interesting that you mentioned you worked in a fund, but then you later on started working for a startup. How does an operator, somebody who wants to become a founder, how do you get to decide what should be the right path? Because you've been part of a fund, then you were an operator, then a founder. But if you could go back in time, would you start before, or do you think the VC route or the startup route would be better? What are your thoughts for listeners who want to build something from the go?
One is nothing in life prepares you for the journey as a founder, right? I think that's what it is. And I think, I was unprepared on many, many levels. I didn't have exposure to what building a SaaS business looked like. I didn't have exposure to selling to the US market. And of course, I didn't know how to actually take a software product all the way to maturity. So I think there are so many things that you will not know, and there are going to be a few things that you will know from your experience. Maybe the fastest path to learning a lot of those is being in an early stage startup where you kind of get to see a lot more of the puzzle. But honestly, there are going to be always many unknowns.
Interesting. And you're part of Y-combinator, and that's a question I'm always willing to ask Y-combinator founders. It's such prestigious. Sometimes you think for startup founders, even more prestigious than doing your MBA from a B school. What was your entire experience with Y-combinator, and does it really live up to the hype?
So I would say it's very similar to what you actually compared it to, right? It's going to a very prestigious MBA school in some sense, right? Of course, you go through a training program in an MBA school, but apart from that, what do you get from the MBA school? You get a great brand, right? Which helps you get a good job. In the case of Y-combinator, you get a great brand and the prestige that helps you, have better fundraise outcomes. You get a network for life, right? And I think with Y-combinator, that's the same. And then, of course, along the way, you're learning lessons, but especially in the startup ecosystem and the way the Y-combinator program runs is you essentially get lessons, and a lot of lessons on failure from other founders, right? And that's really valuable because one thing is that, you are constantly consuming all these great stories in the media, which are all stories of success, right? Like nobody likes to write about a story of a failure.
Right.
But building a startup is really hard. And I think the great thing that Y Combinator does is they go out of their way to expose you to those stories of how hard it was, right? Like even for successful companies like Airbnb and Stripe, like there are, a million small failures that we don't get to see from the outside. The other thing is, something that Y Combinator, of course, has a lot of data on is that the top reason why startups fail is not anything else but founder relationships, right? And so I think the other thing that we personally learned was like it's really important to invest time and energy into those because it's very easy for people to run their parallel paths. And like we are three founders. I look after all things on the business side. I have a product co-founder and I have an engineering co-founder. It's very easy for the three of us because we have such nicely cleanly divided roles to say I will run in my own lane, and I know everything about product, I know everything about engineering, and I don't need to talk to the others. I'll run it like my fiefdom. But what you like need to do is to make sure that you're open to taking decisions collaboratively. You have the understanding on why a certain decision is getting made, even if it's not directly impacting your functional area. So I think that was the other lesson that we learned, and they kind of literally do a founder workshop to help you understand how to have those tough conversations with your co-founders. So I think some practical lessons, a lot of branding for sure, and a lot of fundraising.
Interesting. And I've been into business development and partnerships and sales. So how do you define a sales book? What is would be a sales book, and what are some of the core things that a sales book could accomplish?
Sorry, a sales
Sales playbook.
A sales playbook, yeah. So I think that answer really varies, right, depending on what is the business.
Right.
What companies try to do in a sales playbook is to codify what helps you get the most success, right? So that everybody is not recreating everything from scratch. The way I think about this is literally in like three phases, right? When you have somebody who's super new, right? And maybe they don't understand sales, they don't understand your industry, and they don't understand your product. Now, if you have to onboard them as a salesperson, then what is your best bet, right? Your best bet is to provide them as much detailed guidance and be as directive or prescriptive as you can be, right? Once they begin to develop that understanding, you can kind of loosen the screws. So you can take a step back and you can say, hey, I no longer need to tell you exactly what to say, but I can let you operate in a bigger structure, right? So I can say, hey, you should still do discovery. This is how you should still talk about the product, or there are like going to be 3 parts to this product demo, etc. And then once they look like they are good at experimenting and they're good at defining their own playbooks, then you can, take another leap of faith and say, hey, now you don't even need to maybe stick to the structure. You can experiment a little bit more, and maybe you can help us define the next iteration of our playbook. So I think it depends not just on the process, on the product that you're trying to city of the sale, but also on the person. So I don't think it's also a playbook that fits all. What should that playbook contain? I think it has to contain anything that helps your seller understand what makes your buyer sell more.
Interesting. And especially when it comes to early stage startups, do you think a founder is responsible, or do you think the sales guy, the head of sales guy, is responsible for creating the sales playbook?
Absolutely the founder.
Mm,
I don't think that there is a head of sales early on in a startup.
right.
And I think we learned this the hard way through our own experience. And, what happened was like, while I had done a little bit of sales, I didn't have experience of selling to the US market. So when
Mm,
I started the company, I was like, hey, it would be great if I could quickly bring in somebody who has the expertise, and then, they can help me set up the playbooks, and they can help me, accelerate the whole process instead of me learning and failing. And the person we brought on board was, great. They were super successful. Like one of the metric was, hey, you have to set up like 40 meetings with, this ICP of people within like a month or 2 months. And they were able to set up those 40 meetings, but not one of them converted. Right. And the reason was that in the early stages, when people are actually buying, they're not, you don't have a brand for the product. They can't trust the product. They have to trust you, right? They have to trust you as the founder to say that, okay, I believe that this person will be able to deliver the value that they're talking about. Now, if you bring in, a head of sales or like a consultant or somebody, they are like, this person doesn't have the skin in the game. Now, I might buy this product. 3 months later, this person might no longer be with the company. So I think it's very important for the founder to be the first person doing the sales, not just because they have the vision, for the space so they can sell that better, not just because they probably are the people who understand the product the most, but I think primarily because they are, the reason for trust with the customer.
interesting. Very nice. And especially when like you talked about hiring somebody senior, but especially if you're looking at early stage startups, do you advise founders to have like a sales rep, a junior sales rep, or a sales leader to come in? Obviously, the context would be different from for B2B to marketplace, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, and I can maybe only comment from a B2B perspective on this, right? I think from a B2B perspective, the founder to some extent has to also be the first salesperson, right? Um, but then at the same time, you can bring in somebody junior to, kind of help you scale up because you can't be doing everything and there are lots of other things to do.
Right.
But beyond that, right, the idea is that you as the founder, and the reason why you need to be in charge of sales is because you need to take accountability and you need to understand that if something is not selling, uh, there are probably more fundamental questions to answer, right? You like if you bring in somebody, you don't know whether it was because the salesperson wasn't doing a good job, it was because the product wasn't good, it was because were you selling to the wrong target audience. There are like so many things that could be going wrong, and you want to take away at least one variable, and then experiment systematically with the others.
Interesting. Um, and I'm always looking to create a sense of urgency among my sales teams. So any advice for sales leaders on how should we use urgency, or do you have any tools which helps us create an urgency in deal closing process?
Yeah, so I think that's always a tough one, especially
Right.
in these times, right? And it can be a big cause for revenue leaks in the system because people feel that I'm going to close this, and then they feel they're going to close it the next month, and it doesn't happen. When we look at data, what we see is, if your time to winning a deal is say 15 days, right? Your time to losing a deal is often 45 days. And the reason for that is, people don't like to call out the bad news. So the tool in terms of creating that urgency, I think lies at the very start of that sales process, which is in the discovery, right? So you need to spend that time in discovery, in understanding, why is this person trying to solve the problem, right? And if you can work with them in some sense to go back and see how does that align with their own KPIs, or what impact can this have on their own career, And if you can, through that sales process, keep making that connection stronger, you have a much better chance, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody is selfish, right? Either they want to save on effort or they want to get their next promotion, or maybe it's something that helps them get their next headcount, like whatever it is, right? You have to believe that everybody is going to operate in a selfish manner, and you have to find what those selfish reasons are for your buyer.
Interesting. And from Wingman, you have analyzed a lot of sales calls, and you also have come up with a research report. I'm very interested to understand and know, why, how do sales guys handle objections, and how does the leak really happen? Any insights you can share with us?
Yeah, so the first time we looked at the data was at the start of the pandemic, and the reason why I looked at it was everybody was telling me, "Hey, budgets are frozen. I can't sell anything." And then we went back and looked at the calls. We were like, people are not actually talking so much about budget freezes. Yes, it has increased, but it's not having a big impact on deal win rates. But what is having a big impact on deal win rates was the fact that people's timelines had extended because there was so much uncertainty. Now, skip 2 years ahead, and we all seem to be in the middle of a recession of some sort. And nobody again knows, how deep or long this will be. And so again, there is like a huge wave of uncertainty. But when you look at the same sales call data, because the context is different, the uncertainty is also about the economics. What we are seeing is that the best way to handle those budget discussions, especially in today's environment, is by switching the conversation to ROI. And so what we see is when there's a budget objection, right, and the person brings in ROI instead, your deal win rates actually go up by 30 to 40%. It's very interesting. Like, I think some things are intuitive, some things aren't. But yeah, there's a lot of data that we are studying on understanding, both in the current environment, what is happening, and then overall, what are some of the takeaways from winning deals.
Right, interesting. And I had a bit of an experience before the pandemic happened, and and my sales experience was quite different when I was meeting customers face to face, and after when it became a Zoom calls. Any interesting insight that you found since you've been into the business side of the business? What is the most effective way to sell, especially on Zoom, and are there a lot of touch points which a sales guy needs to do in order to win the deal?
Yeah, so I think one thing that has happened with Zoom is that you can now have kind of more frequent meetings with multiple stakeholders, not at the same time, right? So earlier, especially if you were in a big enterprise type of selling motion, you would set up a meeting, 1 month out, you would travel somewhere, and then you would want to make sure that, all of the 5 or 6 people important to that meeting on the buying panel are in that room, right? Today, because of Zoom, what happens is that you might be doing this. You might be doing like literally 5 different meetings with those 5 stakeholders at different points in time. But you don't have to wait a month to set up that meeting, right? So that's the good thing. Now, what happens in that environment where you're having 5 different meetings versus a single meeting with all the stakeholders is that there is a huge coordination overhead for your buying champion, right? Because now they need to go back and like kind of debrief with everyone and get everybody's time and all of those things. So I think some of those pain points we have to be much more proactive in realizing from the buying side and see where technology can help us, right? So if instead of trying to set up like 3 different meetings, can I actually, set up that one meeting, nicely annotate the recording, send snippets of it later so that I don't have to kind of, repeat that, but I can help with asynchronous decision making, then that helps. The other thing that we've seen happen is the buying committees have actually become larger because, both, especially now with the pandemic, And the fact that it's much easier for me to involve more people, right? Like earlier, if I couldn't get you in the room, then you were probably not going to be a decision maker on that deal. But today, even if I can't get you in the room, you might still be involved in the decision making, or I'll just set up more meetings for you. So your buying committees are larger, and that again, adds some friction, adds, of course, maybe deal cycles. So those are some of the changes we are seeing. I think technology can help address some of those, and some of those we do also have to be proactive in just realizing that there is coordination overhead.
Interesting. And I'm sure you would have hired a lot of salespeople, but any insight or any advice on how do you structure the hiring process, and are there any must ask questions which helps you understand that this could be an A-level hiring sales hire?
I wish I knew. But I think one of the things that, and I think this we've learned with our own experience, the kind of salesperson that you want to hire as your first salesperson and the kind of salesperson that you're hiring, maybe as your sixth or seventh salesperson, they can look very different, right? Your first sales hire is in many ways, has to have that entrepreneurial founder type of mentality, right? And that person, might actually not be the best fit in a large scaled up organization because they like to invent playbooks. They can't, necessarily follow a process. They might not have the best CRM hygiene, but they're great at building relationships. They're great at maybe putting the other person at ease, things like that. So I think that changes pretty dramatically, especially from that 1 to 10 journey. And we've kind of seen that experience ourselves. And I think the other thing that helps is I like to actually test people for one thing, which is empathy. And I think that holds across the board. So, you can observe it in many simple things. Like if you ask somebody to send you a calendar invite, are they putting the subject with something that is more meaningful for you versus more meaningful for them, right? Like it could be something as simple as, do I put my name first or do I put your name first? Now, when that's showing up on my calendar, what is more, worthy for me? It's actually more worthwhile for me to know who I'm speaking with rather than, my own name. So, simple things that help, that show like, how good are they with details and how good are they with empathy help.
Interesting. And you also use case studies with candidates just to understand their the thinking ability, and you suggest using such case studies.
Not necessarily in our sales process. For some roles we do, like for customer success roles, where we feel that the ability to problem solve more deeply is more valuable. We don't do that for at least our sales process.
Interesting. And in a startup, we're always looking to hire someone, but what are some of the early signs you see where a new hire is not working out, and how do you measure their impact, say in the first 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, if it's your first sales hire and you're still trying to figure out whether or not you have product market fit, right? It's the first thing is you want to ideally hire 2 people at the same time, right? So that you can isolate for the fact that is it the person or is it my product market fit, right? The second is that, once you've hired somebody and you want to make a decision on whether or not it's working out, you have to be fair in terms of deciding whether it's the controllables or the uncontrollables that are impacting their performance, right? So, are they actually, so first is measure them on their inputs, right? And second is measure them on their coachability. So if you're giving them feedback, are they actually incorporating that in the next iteration? And are they doing the work even though they might not be getting the results? Because then it's the director's problem, not the actor's problem, right? Like if you don't have the right script, then I can't make the best movie. So I think those are two things to keep in mind, especially when you're very, very early and you're just hiring like your first two salespeople.
Got it. Interesting. And Shruti, I just want to do the top three quickly. What's your favorite business book?
Oh, my favorite business book. So it's the Chris Voss book on negotiations.
Oh, nice. Love that book. We'll put that in the show notes. And if you could go back in time when you started Wingman, what is one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
I think I would have focused a lot more on understanding how to build a brand and how to build trust for a brand.
Oh, nice. And do you have any favorite online tools, for example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom?
I think Gmail, I'm a big power user of all the keyboard shortcuts, and I've customized those for myself.
Oh, interesting. Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. And what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about Clari Wingman?
So not Gmail, because I get a lot of spam emails. But I'm active on LinkedIn, so that's kind of the best place to find me. You can look for Shruti Kapoor and search for Wingman along with it. And I think if you're building your business or if you're in sales, we have a fun newsletter which has some of the fun facts that I was sharing around things that we've learned by kind of looking at data more deeply. So yeah, we can put that in the show notes and people can have some fun on Fridays.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes. Shruti, thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Thanks, Rohit.